Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein here with the full gang, Patricia Murphy and Tia Mitchell in town, and there's absolutely nothing to talk about, is it?
You know, it's a boring week in Georgia, but we're going to make the most of it.
Well, today is the day Georgia Republicans are headed to the polls right now to decide two of the biggest races of the year, and both of them got a lot more interesting over the last 48 hours. On one side of the ballot, the Republican U.S. Senate race between Congressman Mike Collins and former football coach Derek Dooley. That's the one that will decide who faces Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff in November. On the other, the Republican governor's race between Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and healthcare billionaire Rick Jackson, the most expensive Republican primary for governor in state history. And this past Sunday, both of those races got last-minute seismic endorsements that could scramble everything. We're going to break down what happened, what it means, and what to watch tonight as results come in. Patricia, we're going to start with the governor's race, and we're about to play you the ad that really defines the last couple hours, days. But we, all three of us, are just finishing up one of the stops on the campaign tour. I know you were with me with Governor Kemp and Burt Jones this morning. It was the first event the two of them held together since Burt Jones got Brian Kemp's endorsement in a truly shocking moment in Georgia politics.
Yes. There was a scene a long time ago in The Real Housewives where a real housewife named Teresa flips over a table and everybody's like, what just happened? I feel like Brian Kemp just flipped over a table by endorsing Burt Jones. Nobody saw this coming. Nobody was expecting it. The governor's been so deeply involved in Derek Dooley's Senate race that there was no expectation that he was going to get involved in this governor's race. And so when this endorsement came out, again, just hours after President Trump endorsed Mike Collins, here comes the governor now changing the conversation, changing the subject for everybody, and endorsing and getting behind Burt Jones. And in the process, essentially getting against Rick Jackson. That took the entire Georgia politics ecosystem by surprise, and we have all been working to unpack it ever since.
I got a heads up that something was happening, and I guessed maybe 10 different things, and this was not even remotely on my list. Burt Jones is now doing everything he can to let Republican voters know about this table-turning moment.
Here's Governor Kemp with an important announcement.
Over the last 8 years, we've accomplished a lot, and we've had a strong ally in Burt Jones. Burt knows how to get things done, cutting taxes, taking criminals off the streets, raising teacher pay, creating jobs. Burt has been there every step of the way.
Join Governor Kemp and President Trump in supporting Burt Jones for governor.
Let's get the vote out for Burt on Tuesday.
Keep chopping.
Keep chopping.
Yeah, look, a callback to 2018 and Governor Kemp's mantra way back when. But Tia, your texts were blowing up, my texts were blowing up. Republicans were basically saying, why? And we can help unpack a little bit of that.
I mean, I think it's so interesting that on the governor's race, Kemp, in endorsing Burt Jones, gives that unity ticket that Republicans want, where Kemp being the popular governor, President Trump being the leader of the party who's so influential over Republican voters, they have unified around a single candidate in the governor's race, which you would think gives Burt Jones a huge advantage. However, said unification comes after the end of early voting, 2 days before Election Day. So the question is, will it have the effect it could have had maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago?
Yeah. And I asked the governor that very question. You know, it's one thing to endorse. It's another thing to endorse, 2 days before the election, the Sunday night, right before a primary. Why now? Right before the runoff. And he essentially said that he sees Burt Jones as the best continuation of his legacy. And he makes the same case generally that he makes about the other big name he's endorsing, the big ticket candidate he's endorsing in this race, which is Derek Dooley on the Senate side, that only Burt Jones can win in November. He's not knocking Rick Jackson. He went out of his way, Patricia, not to say anything negative about Rick Jackson, but he also said he thinks Burt Jones is the best Republican at the top of the ticket to win in November.
Yeah, I think for your average bear watching this from the outside looking in, the question is, well, why is it a big deal? Why is it surprising that the governor would endorse the lieutenant governor? That just seems natural. They actually have not been in lockstep every step of the way, as he says in that ad. In the hours after the 2020 election, days, weeks, and months after the 2020 election, the lieutenant governor and the governor were on very different pages. And specifically, the lieutenant governor was supporting President Trump and his efforts to essentially overturn the election. The lieutenant governor doesn't describe it that way, but there were very different pages from the governor during the Buckhead City fight, very different pages on the idea of letting Atlanta have a vote to secede, or Buckhead secede from Atlanta. So, and their tone has been different. Their approach to the president has been very different. But you've got to give Jones credit. The way he's campaigned has been very much supporting what the governor has achieved in his 8 years. And for any Georgia voter who has liked what they've seen from the governor, Burt Jones did not give them any reasons to believe that wasn't the case. And then now for the governor to come in and say, yes, this will be 8 more years if you elect this guy, I think that is a hugely important endorsement for Burt Jones. I think this race is a toss-up still, but it feels like this has really given Jones a huge, huge boost before the majority of voters go to the polls on Tuesday.
So, Patricia, as we're talking, I just got a text from a veteran political operative who texted, still confused by the Burt endorsement. I can understand the reasons, but he's not favored to win. Is it so Kemp can say he backed his people and then hang back in the fall? These are the types of texts I know we've all been getting since that Sunday night surprise endorsement. So let's talk about why Kemp might have done what he did. There's reasons. You mentioned their notable falling out over 2020 and Buckhead cityhood, and that their Venn diagrams don't completely align. They also do generally get along. They also do generally support each other on key issues, taxes and budget projects and tort reform in 2025 and other big ticket items that they've been united on. But Kemp has also talked about how he wants someone as an outsider in this office. One of the reasons, and I think it's fair to say, there was some backlash over the way Rick Jackson has been running his campaign. There was some consternation within the Kemp office about how the Rick Jackson ad that insinuated, that implied that Kemp had endorsed Rick Jackson went over. I don't think that's the motivating factor. We have to note that some of the key players behind Rick Jackson's campaign were also behind David Perdue's campaign in 2022. So there was always
Kemp.
Against Brian Kemp, that 50-something point route that Kemp won over David Perdue. So there's never been a close, super close, tight relationship between Kemp and Rick Jackson's operations, even if the two men do get along, because Rick Jackson's hosted fundraisers for the governor. He's donated to the governor. He said nothing but praise for the governor on the campaign trail. He's even said, Tia, that he wants to put a statue up of the governor on the Capitol grounds over how he handled the coronavirus pandemic.
Oh, brother. And the old brother is not because I don't think Governor Kemp did a great job, and maybe he is deserving of a statue. But when has it become like, I'm trying to get favor with this person, I'm going to offer to do something to glorify them. It's such a interesting another way that Donald Trump has changed our politics. I will say that I wonder if some of this is about concerns, not just about how Rick Jackson has conducted his campaign, which, we know that the governor's office felt the ad was misleading, where Kemp was talking in general about the race, did not endorse Rick Jackson, was trying to stay out of it. But then Rick Jackson spends all these millions of dollars to put out this ad that insinuates that Trump was, speaking nicely about his campaign. It didn't insinuate it, he was, but he also spoke nicely about Burt Jones, and that part is what was left out. So it was kind of taken out of context. But my bigger issue, or my bigger point, is I wonder if some of this is about the fact that Burt Jones is an unknown when it comes to how he would govern just by being an outsider. We do know that some Republicans are saying they worry that Rick Jackson is not truly MAGA, that if he were to become governor, he wouldn't be as conservative as maybe his campaign, and he is saying he will be. I think that's an undercurrent that we're hearing, that some people just don't trust or don't feel like they have enough data to know what kind of leader Rick Jackson would be. And I wonder if that factors into Brian Kemp, who has, as much as we, say he stood up to Trump, he is very hard right, very conservative. And I think he wants his successor to continue that on. And it's almost like the devil you know versus the devil you don't. He knows Burt Jones. He doesn't know Rick Jackson in the context of how he would govern.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because there's an outsider and then there's sort of like a mystery. And voters don't like a mystery. They may like an outsider, but they don't like somebody that they don't quite understand. I think also that Kemp is very strategic. He's also the most popular Republican in the state. And I think he does want to see his legacy continue. And when you listen to Burt Jones on the campaign trail, he literally says, help me continue the 8 years of what we've been doing with Governor Kemp. And Rick Jackson says, everybody down at the Capitol is in this for themselves. You can't trust them. He also says very nice things about Governor Kemp, but it's sort of multiple messages coming out from Rick Jackson during his rallies. Listen, people love him at his rallies. He gets huge turnout and very emotional response. I do also think the question of Rick Jackson's money is turning out to be a bit of a double-edged sword. I would assume that Republicans would want a candidate who has unlimited resources and has literally said, I will spend whatever it takes. It feels like there's been a bit of backlash, even from some voters, about the amount of Rick Jackson has spent. Still came in many points behind Burt Jones and has absolutely napalmed the entire state of Georgia with negative ads about Burt Jones. And then also, you watch a guy fly away in his private jet and his private helicopter in a year where affordability is the big question. It just feels a little... You can see why Governor Kemp might think it's easier to get behind the lieutenant governor who's done what I have done, and I know what that's going to look like.
And we should note the new fundraising numbers and financial figures have come out. Since we last joined you on Politically Georgia, we now know that Rick Jackson has spent $107 million or so on his own campaign, all told. Remember, he got on the race saying he'd spend $50 million at least. He has now doubled that. And it makes Burt Jones's very sizable $26 or so million look like small potatoes when $26 million of your
He's
own
like
cash.
Suddenly the underfunded underdog.
Exactly. You also have to think, and I've talked to Kemp's allies and people close in his inner circle about this too. There's also this reflection that Burt Jones is a much better candidate in their view than he was a year ago. And a year ago, there was all issues about questions about whether or not he had the work ethic. Was he going to campaign? Was he going to run the sort of operation that can win in November if he wasn't really being tested in May? Well, now that question's out the door, because when you have $107 million or so dropped on your head, you get tested really quickly. Is there a candidate on the ballot? Is there anyone who's actually not on the ballot, who's been more tested, who's had more on the line in this election than Governor Kemp? Because he's backing Burt Jones in this surprise move. He is not just backing Derek Dooley, but he basically created Derek Dooley. He drafted Derek Dooley. He recruited Derek Dooley. So, I mean, this is going to be a huge runoff for many reasons. But for Governor Kemp and his political legacy, Tia, it is everything.
Yeah, his legacy and also his path forward, because I don't think we expect him to just like fade into, retirement. There's just widespread speculation that he could run for higher office like president. I also wonder if Derek Dooley, I thought about this today when we were at the Dooley event. I was like, is there a future like where Derek Dooley serves this one term, then all of a sudden Brian Kemp is like, you know what? Maybe I do want to be a senator. Maybe in 2030 or whatever. I'm terrible at math.
Or 2028.
Yeah, 2028 for president, but maybe 2032 if Derek Dooley becomes senator. And he says he's only serving, one term?
2 terms.
2 terms. So, it just makes me wonder if Brian Kemp is like, I'm going to pick not just the person who I want, but the person who can keep the seat warm for me. I don't know that to be true, but it just makes me wonder. Either way, there is just so much riding on this. If his candidates are successful, that would make him very sought after. Even if he doesn't run for office, just you want to be endorsed by someone who's known for picking winners. And that would make him, and as the popular former governor of a swing state, any Republican who wants to be president is going to want Brian Kemp on their side if he's a winner this cycle.
Yeah. If he's a winner, Patricia, he is a kingmaker. If he's a loser, big questions about what he's remembered for in Georgia beyond those policies and initiatives and his reaction to the 2020 election and of course the pandemic. But what is he going to be most remembered for in the not so distant past?
Yeah, I think on Tuesday night, it's the question of sort of like personal embarrassment for Kemp if his chosen candidates don't get across the finish line. He's put his own reputation, in Dooley's case, his money, his PAC's money, and his trust with a lot of the lawmakers inside the Capitol. It's not a Hail Mary in football terms, but he's throwing long on both of these. But I think the real question of his legacy comes down to November. If he has either chosen somebody who didn't get across the finish line and Republicans lose in November, they have spent, especially for the Senate race, they have spent tens of millions of dollars they didn't need to. They have given Jon Ossoff a humongous head start while they had this intra-party feud in the Senate race. If the Republicans don't win in November, I think Kemp takes a real hit and gets the blame for a lot of that. In the governor's race, I think if Republicans win, it'll be in large part because Republicans have liked what Brian Kemp has brought them for 8 years. If they lose in November, it will have less to do with Brian Kemp, but if he has gotten involved in this race and upset the apple cart, flipped over the table 2 days before the race, how much of that accrues to him? How much of that blame comes his direction?
And one more note before we take a break and get to the Senate side of the race, which is this, and we're exploring this in the newsletter this morning. Redistricting feels like it's on the line too, in a sense, for this runoff, because we know a lot of House Republicans, we've been hearing it privately, very rarely publicly, but privately, there are a lot of House Republicans who are worried that overhauling these political boundaries in the middle of the summer for 2028 will do nothing but energize Democratic voters. And for the most part, we've heard Kemp and Senate Republicans backing the idea. So there is this sense that if Burt Jones wins, there'll be a bigger push on the Republican side to go forward no matter what and push through redistricting. But if Rick Jackson, who's backed by a lot of House Republican leaders, if he wins, there'll be more reticence and there might be even a full pullback. It still might be pulled back if Burt Jones wins, it still might go through no matter what. But there is that sense, Patricia, that redistricting could be on the line.
Yeah. And Greg, I'm going to turn the question back to you because I think people would be curious to, it seemed like it was required that they do redistricting now that the governor has added that to the special session. But you said that's not the case. If you sort of look at the language of the call, it does not require it. And it would ultimately be up to who's that, the governor or the leaders?
Well, the lawmakers could say, hey, look, we're going to convene it for a special session, but we might not pass what you want us to pass, right? And there's other things they have to do. They have to meet those voting changes by the July 1st deadline. They could just punt the ball and say the deadline's now July 2028, right? They could change that. There's some other things they have to do in the special session. They'll still have a special session, but there's a deep sentiment. There's a deep frustration among House Republicans, especially among some in those swing districts who are really worried that this could backfire. So stay tuned. Still to come, let's talk about the other hotly contested election in the Georgia primary runoff. That is the race for the Republican challenger to incumbent Jon Ossoff. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. Greg Bluestein here with Tia Mitchell and Patricia Murphy, a full house here for election week. And reminder, you can catch our analysis tomorrow morning. We'll be doing it super late tonight or tomorrow morning. Shani B, we thank you for all your, for staying up basically through 3 nights straight in a row. But we'll have all your election analysis on Wednesday morning. We'll tell you what happened, what we think about what happened, and what's next in the November election. And of course, if you've got a question you'd like to ask us here on Politically Georgia, you can call our hotline anytime, day or night, leave a question, and we'll play it back and answer it right here on the show during our Monday mailbag segment. Email politicallygeorgia@ajc.com. The number is 770-810-5297. Okay, let's talk about the other bombshell, which was President Trump. Early morning on his birthday, Sunday, right before 1 a.m., he fires off a very lengthy social media post on his Truth Social account, essentially saying that Mike Collins is the MAGA warrior. He's the trusted patriot, in the president's words. Tia, we have been watching for this for a very long time. We thought it happened 6 months ago. We thought it might happen 6 weeks ago. We thought it might happen 6 days ago. It has happened right before the runoff. Mike Collins is out there already trumpeting it to everyone who will listen. It's a major move. It's not quite unexpected because if anyone was going to get it, it always seemed like it would be Mike Collins. But the president's hand was stayed for so long, and then suddenly it broke.
Broke around 1 a.m. overnight Saturday into Sunday morning. You know, you said that Mike Collins, you were able to get the inside scoop that he was actually up late and got the call live, but pretty late. So it seemed not to be something that was super planned out.
As it goes with the president.
As it goes with the president, you know, in contrast with like Brian Kemp, he does his thing, but you can tell he's already planned to appear with Burt Jones the next morning. There's a little bit more coordination in that. But I think that, you know, Mike Collins wanted it whenever he could get it. He would have taken it, you know, at 6:59 a.m. on Tuesday, the minute before polls opened. You know, I think he wanted it, but would he have liked it earlier? Absolutely. But the fact that he got it, I think, is the big thing, because we know that there was very little chance that Trump was going to endorse Dooley, because we know Trump rewards loyalty, and he had very little evidence of loyalty from Dooley for Dooley to earn the endorsement. But the best Dooley could have hoped for was silence. And we know that Team Kemp worked really hard to try to get that silence. And, you know, you can argue they got it until 2 days before the election. And so the surprise, as you said, Greg, really is the timing and what made Trump finally decide, you know what, I'm not going to stay out of this. I'm going to go with Mike Collins.
I asked Governor Kemp if he felt betrayed by that, because they were pretty confident. It seemed like from the outside, they were pretty confident that Donald Trump would stay neutral in this race and let it play out. In a word, Kemp said, no, he did not feel betrayed, but Tuesday, you know, we'll play out. Here's what he said.
Making sure that we have the right people at the top of the ticket that can win, and make sure, you know, we retire Jon Ossoff from the U.S. Senate and make sure that, Lord help, Keisha Lance Bottoms is not leading our state in the governor's office. So that is driving my decisions.
And Tia, you also asked him a very interesting question about why the governor feels like, as an insider, Burt Jones is the best candidate for governor, but as an outsider, Derek Dooley is the best candidate for U.S. Senate. You asked him if that was contradictory. Here's what he said.
Really building off the great legacy of people that came before me. When you think about Sonny Perdue, Nathan Deal, what we've been able to do in my administration, working with the Republican leadership in the House and in the Senate, giving $12 billion back to the taxpayers. But then you think about Washington, D.C., we're running against their inaction. I mean, I don't know if you've seen any polls on the approval ratings of Congress, but I think it's down into the teens now. And we got to send a different leader to Washington, D.C., which is why I've been supporting Derek Dooley this whole time.
So, Patricia, there is this sort of insider-outsider contradiction here.
Yeah, I think the way that Kemp explained that actually makes sense. I do think that voters evaluate these two positions very differently for governor and Senate, because the role of the senator is to either be the gas pedal or the checks and balances on the administration. That's a very real difference in those jobs. It was more of a surprise that he talked about having kind of an insider with Burt Jones, because he had said there should be an outsider in the governor's race, and that would be the best way to help the Republican ticket. He said that in an interview with Politico not too long ago during the Masters. So he was just contradicting himself. I don't think he's contradicting the thought process of Georgia voters. One thing that I think is super important about the president's endorsement of Collins is something that he said about Derek Dooley, specifically about his voting record. He said Derek Dooley didn't vote in 2020 or 2016 and said, "I lost Georgia in 2020 when the facts have proven I actually won by a lot." To me, that's the end. It was a very long endorsement. To me, that's the real reason that Trump has endorsed against Dooley.
And you should read Patricia's column about that in Monday's AJC. All you have to do is Google it, and you can find all her backstories, because by the time you hear this, she'll have written 3 more stories. But I actually asked Mike Collins about that up in Woodstock at his campaign event on Sunday. Essentially asked him, hey, look, how do you feel about the 2020 election? I know what he said over and over. I wanted to give him another chance to explain his views on the 2020 election. But also I asked him what his response is if he is the nominee and Jon Ossoff campaigns against him as a election denier. Here's what Mike Collins said.
You know, Greg, I've always stated the same thing. 2020 was legitimately rigged. You know, and the reason I say that is because you don't change the rules halfway through the game. You know, by sending out absentee ballots to everybody, putting all those drop boxes out there to give that advantage to people with wanting to do nefarious things. So, but it's been fixed. A lot of that has been fixed. We're moved on to 2026. We're hammering on Jon Ossoff. We're going to continue to do that. We're going to turn out our voters, and at the end of the day, we're going to win this thing.
The second part of that question, if Jon Ossoff's out there, if you're the nominee and saying, my opponent's election denier, do you worry
Jon Ossoff is going to say all kinds of things, Bluestein. You know that. So I'm not worried about that. I'm going to defeat Jon Ossoff comparing resume to resume. What he's done for the people of this state versus what I've been able to do, what he stands for versus what I stand for.
And Tia, what he was talking about with changing the rules halfway through the game were pandemic era changes in some counties in Georgia that Republicans backed too in many ways, that encouraged more absentee balloting because they couldn't open poll sites at the height of the pandemic when there was movement restrictions and you know, all those things that we do not remember fondly about that time in Georgia politics. But really, you know, this is Mike Collins' way of trying to A, move forward, but B, also try to keep the Republican base motivated. That's the tightrope that he's walking.
Yeah, and I'm glad that was the point that I wanted to make sure we made. Like, it wasn't last minute changes. These were, you can say emergency changes, but changes to deal with the pandemic. And we should also note changes that were not found to have, you know, created fraud or illegal ballots or anything that jeopardized the true outcome of the election, other than making it easier for people to vote in the middle of a pandemic. But I do think Mike Collins, I've always said that I do think Mike Collins has the energy that can match Jon Ossoff in debate, that can match Jon Ossoff on the campaign trail. He's good in a crowd. He's good talking to people. He's good relating to people. You hear the little twang when he talks, and, you know, he sounds like Georgia. And so I do think he's a good candidate. He really is a good candidate. But we also know that he comes with a lot of baggage. And that's what, when we hear Dooley and Kemp talk about it, they talk about his outsider status, but they also talk about his baggage or allude to it, the ethics investigation, you know, the aid that he let go of, the social media that's going to be questioned. You know, they don't say it this way, but they know that some of the things he said to support Donald Trump are going to be issues in the general election. And they say, yeah, again, they don't say it this plainly, but Derek Dooley, because he hasn't been as tied to President Trump, won't have the same type of baggage in the general election.
I agree with that. Seeing Derek Dooley, he's become a much better candidate over time. Before, I think he had a really hard time even introducing himself to people in a large GOP crowd. Now he works the crowd. People like him. He's very friendly. He's got his stump speech down. So I think he's become a very, very good candidate. However, he doesn't speak the language of the GOP base. To me, he doesn't, he has a very logical path forward, but it doesn't capture that emotion that the GOP base in Georgia seems to have right now. It's very pro-Trump. It's very MAGA. The question is what happens in the suburbs? What happens in the exurbs? And because Mike Collins sounds like Georgia, but he sounds like part of Georgia. He sounds like the part of Georgia that Republicans have been winning for a long time. Derek Dooley sounds like the part of Georgia that Republicans used to win and have been losing recently. And so I think that's the governor's calculus. Also, the Ossoff team cannot wait to pull out the ethics investigation word for word and slice that and dice that up into a bunch of ads. Ossoff says, I don't care which one I run against. They're both corrupt insiders. Or they're both
puppets of Trump.
Puppets of Trump, daddy's boys. You're hitting the gas on the Trump administration. Dooley does not have the record of voting with the Trump White House. Collins, along with the Lake and Riley bill, which I think is very, very important, has also voted not to engage with the president on the ballroom, the war in Iran, gas prices, affordability, a lot that Georgia voters are responding very negatively to right now. So I think it's a kind of a mixed bag for Collins.
As you're watching the returns tonight in this Senate race, view it a lot like you watch returns in a Democrat versus Republican race in a sense, because it's Derek Dooley who does best in Metro Atlanta. And so if you're seeing him at 60 plus in Cobb County, which was the biggest home of the biggest number of Republican ballots, even though it's a blue county back in the primary, if you're seeing him with huge numbers in DeKalb, in Cobb, in Fulton, and you see him up, single digits, but a hefty margin in places like Hall County, Forsyth County, Paulding County, the exurbs that are vote-rich Republican areas, then you know he's having a great night. If you see Mike Collins cutting those margins and then just killing it 80% in a lot of these rural counties, you know it's going to be a long night for Derek Dooley. Okay, that's going to do it for us today. Election day here in Georgia. Polls close at 7 tonight, and we're going to be watching every race, including all the Democratic races. They're not as marquee as the Republicans, but there's a number of Democratic races on the Democratic ballot as well. We're going to break all of them down in a special edition of Politically Georgia, first thing tomorrow morning, with results and analysis of tonight's runoff elections. And of course, if you enjoy what you heard, please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform and share Politically Georgia with a friend. We'll talk to you next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.